wildlife, the majestic megafauna of East Africa, elephants, lions, cheetahs. And he did it in a characteristic way by depicting the deaths in iconic images and writing about his own experiences, using texts from classic books related to Africa. But it wasn't just the content of his work that was avant-garde. His perfectly recognizable style, too, anticipated so much of the way we see now. His collages of sex, gore, and the sublime, borrowing an image here, a found item there, and even his own blood, were remixing before that became the primary creative mode of the digital age. More than that, in a perfectly 20th-century way, before personal branding and the cult of identity washed over us, PB was his art. Those experiences he'd gone so far and suffered so dearly for, getting trampled by an elephant in the process, were the material. PB's whirring life and mind were the main event, his canvases just artifacts of his process, of his being. And who he was is incredibly significant. Via his friends, Keynes and Karen Blixen, whom he would eventually become a neighbor of in Kenya, he could touch that old Africa, the big-game trophy-hunting colonialist Africa. At home, he was descended from two industrial-age fortunes, tobacco and railroad, American icons and American sins both. He overlapped or interacted with many of the great artistic traditions of the 1900s, from his collaborations with the painter Francis Bacon to his dialogues with Warhol, from Picasso to experimental film with the Mekas brothers. He was high society within the last American generation to recognize the claim through family name. He was famous when fame was still something you went out and did in person, working a room, wowing a crowd, earning it over and over at every appearance, every night. And still he kept just going forward. By the time I met him, of course, that fame, as an artist, playboy, activist, and adventurer, had dimmed somewhat, even if his feverish energy certainly had not. Gone were the days of playing around with the Rolling Stones and Lee Radziwill out east, of blitzing Studio 54 with the factory crowd and photographing supermodels in the bush and in the buff. Gone the days of his collaborations with Bacon, of traipsing hither and thither across Africa from his 45-acre bolt hole in Nairobi. He was 78 at the time, and no longer really producing books or shows of his art, though he was still making it. He was incapable of not pressing the world through the thresher of his vision and process. And during my stay, he was never not snapping pictures or scribbling or rubbing pastels over photographs. When there was news of him, page 6 type stuff of his running off on a debauch, bringing hookers home, or saying something crude, it was not altogether flattering. But if his reputation was a bit messy, in large part because he was a mess, and his faculties downgraded by a series of strokes, he was, for me, still the author of the greatest images of my childhood, images that made me crave life and adventure and the scars that came along with them. So when I went out to his famous home in Montauk for a series of interviews, I went looking for a legend, and maybe even a childish idea of returning my hero to his former glory. But I needn't have bothered. Peter Beard did not need my help, or that of any other mortal, to be something out of myth. He was, and would always be, half Tarzan, half Byron, as Bob Colacello once described him. This is it. This is existentialism, Beard said, while we were sitting outside on his Montauk property, the easternmost residence on Long Island, looking out on infinity, talking about art and life and death. Spring was then rushing into full bloom, and with it, dozens of birds and the families of local deer were celebrating the warming sun with song and wobbly-limbed dance. Over the course of his career, whether he was photographing the wildest creatures of East Africa or the finer-boned figures of the East End, in his writing, his diaries, or the monumental collages that bring them all together, Beard had made a living, and his legend, wrapping his work around such elemental earthen subjects.